Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Adam Beatty. I'm from Akeneo, and I'm also joined today by George Dzuricsko from Citation. Today, we're going to talk about preparing for PIM and approaching your Akeneo discovery. Before we get into that, a couple housekeeping items. First, we encourage questions. If you look on your webinar screen, there's a section where you can ask questions. Please ask questions. We will answer them at the end of the webinar. And additionally, this session will be recorded and an email link will be sent out by the Akeneo marketing team with a link to where you can access that information. So, a little introduction. My name is Adam Beatty. I'm a functional consultant with Akeneo. I work with new customers in conjunction with integration partners to help them maximize the use of their Akeneo PIM. I also run partner trainings and help run Akeneo's certification program. And today I'm joined by George from Citation. George, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. My name is George Dzuricsko. I am the lead solution developer at Citation, where we specialize in product data management. We're an Akeneo partner, and I personally have been working with implementing Akeneo since version 1.7. I'm also certified as an implementation specialist as well as a developer. So let's sort of jump into it and really break down why we're here. I think a lot of us have ideas about what a discovery is, but specifically in the context of PIM, Adam, what do you consider discovery to be?
It's a great question, George. So if we really boil it down, we like to think of discovery as that very beginning phase of a project where we're trying to understand why are we here, what are we trying to solve for, and how do we propose to solve it. Now, this seems very obvious, but it's often overlooked, and it's something that I think many customers don't quite appreciate the importance of. George, obviously you've worked on many Akeneo implementations. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think the first thought is that PIMs are hard. They're often a little bit more difficult to think about and plan for than a standard e-commerce website, in part because they're really a back-end system. And when people think about product data, they're usually visualizing it in some way, oftentimes as an e-commerce website, maybe as a catalog. But the product data in the PIM itself is the only thing that flows through. So it's really important to make sure everyone's on the same page and align with what we're building in the PIM, why it's important, and to make sure it actually meets the business needs. So that brings us to who needs to be involved with the discovery.
So the people that we want to be in the room during our discovery, this is very important, and it's something that we actually run into an issue with projects as well, is who needs to be in the room. I have many different customers ask me that as we begin the implementation process. Who needs to be there? Just the IT team? Do I need my product marketers? Who should be there? There's a little bit of confusion. So during our discovery phase, we need a couple of people. Sometimes it could be 3 or 4, sometimes it could be 10. It really depends on the enterprise itself. But first, we need a project stakeholder. We need someone who can be a representative of executives, could be an executive themselves, someone who has the power and the ability to drive the project internally. A PIM project is very cross-functional, and you can obviously run into silos when you work cross-functionally. So it's important that we have someone who can break down those silos and drive the project forward. Additionally, we want product content creators. Akeneo has been designed from the ground up to enable those product content creators to provide compelling product information to customers. That's really its primary purpose. We like to think of it as something that enables product marketers, not an IT tool. So of course we need representatives from these teams. Every enterprise has different names for them. We can think of them as belonging to the marketing team, product managers, merchandisers, the photography team, the media team. We need those people in the discovery phase because they understand the enrichment processes, and very importantly, they understand product information. They understand the products and what customers are looking for when they make that important purchase decision. Additionally, we want people from the different sales channels. So if we're integrating our Akeneo PIM to an e-commerce website, we want to make sure we have a representative from the e-commerce team. If we're also working on syndication and a print channel, we need to have representatives from those systems there. They're going to be receiving this product information from Akeneo and leveraging it, so they need to have a voice in the room. So this is kind of the more business side of the team. George, you want to talk about some of the more technical resources we want in the room?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Adam. I think from a developer perspective, in short, really anyone who owns or manages a system holding or receiving product data is somebody who should be involved with the discovery at some point. I don't think the IT team needs to be in the room for the entire portion of a discovery. I really prefer PIMS and Akeneo in general to be driven by the business needs and the content team as opposed to being an IT driven process. But you have to have the IT developers and the IT teams there who touch the important systems that will be connecting to Akeneo. So oftentimes this includes ERP, any downstream e-commerce destinations, anybody who's in charge of administering or managing the digital asset managers. Really love to have any legacy database system teams as well. If you're moving over from a soon to be deprecated internal PIM system, you really need to have those guys around so that they can answer the difficult technical questions that are going to come up in a discovery.
So we've introduced the people that need to be in the room for the discovery, but what are the actual activities? What are the key things we're going to be doing during the discovery? So we're going to be analyzing and defining some key processes and structures during the discovery phase. Doesn't mean it's going to be a complete, modeling of data, for example, but we really need to dig into everything that we can and have a general idea of what a solution is going to look like. So we need to analyze and define the data model. In Akeneo, a lot of success of a project is based off your data model, the structuring of your product information. In Akeneo specifically, we're thinking of attributes and families and categories. And this data model has an impact on even the technical components of the project, the integrations, and of course, the functional components, how you enable your teams within Akeneo and how you present your data to customers. So during the scoping phase, we want to have an idea of what that data model is going to look like. Again, it might not be entirely complete coming out of discovery, but we need to have a very good understanding, an idea of what it will look like. Next, people processes. So Akeneo is going to integrate to many systems. It could be 2 to 15 applications, depending on the complexity of the customer. And we have all these applications, and there are business processes and people that are working in these upstream and downstream systems and within Akeneo itself. So we need to understand who these people are, what they're doing, what these business processes are. So that covers from a functional perspective. George, you want to talk about some of the more technical components?
Yeah, I think the best place to start here with the system processes is where does your product data currently live and how does it currently flow? Really dig into those two questions because they're simple questions, they're short, they're small words, but they're actually very difficult to answer when you get into larger enterprise businesses that have been storing their product data in oftentimes multiple places. Also consider, who has access to the product data currently, any sort of security requirements you may have. I think these are all really key questions to sort of lean into and make sure that you understand what your system looks like. And then I also want to go into the design phase and the solution, both as a verb and a noun. You really need to make sure that any solutioning that needs to be done for the project happens early on so that way you don't have to rework anything later into the project. I really think that the discovery is a great time to validate that your solution is going to be an effective one and is really what you want to be emphasizing for the future business needs.
All right,
so Adam, yeah,
sorry, go ahead, George.
I'll let you talk about the business outputs, Adam.
Great. So we have talked about the people that need to be in the workshop. We've talked about the activities. So now let's consider the outputs. What do we want to walk away from the discovery with? So first, we want that product structure, that data model I just talked about. We want to have a basic understanding of it. And we want some documentation around it. We want that workflow structure. So you want to understand, again, what the product enrichment effort is. We've analyzed it, of course, during our discovery. Now we're going to need to document it and understand if there's changes that need to be made. Future requirements. This is a big one. So many times we'll work with customers. They'll be integrating PIM, and they'll say, "Hey, let's start for now just in the U.S. That's the market we want to focus on." And then you dig in and ask them, and it turns out they actually want to expand to Europe in a year or two. So we need to know that ahead of time, because there's certain configurations and certain considerations we need to make in Akeneo as part of the project that will more easily enable this future expansion. For that specific case, new locales, we want to create attributes that are localizable and maybe even scopable. But there's other future requirements that could come along, new sales channels, other integrations, or potential process changes, acquisitions. If we know, hey, we're in the middle of acquiring a company that we'd like to eventually bring into Akeneo. Well, during the discovery phase, we want to make sure we understand that and can account for it and future-proof our solution as much as possible. And then finally, a project plan. So we normally like to see a project plan coming out of discovery. I think sometimes there's an initial project plan coming out of the sales process, which is great. It's an important start. But during discovery, we can really refine it and make sure we have a timeline, we understand our resources and risks. And in some instances, we'll have integrators that won't actually build out a full project plan until discovery is actually done. And we'll commonly see part of the discovery will be our Akeneo functional workshop, where I'll go on site and work with the integrator and the customer. And then coming out of that workshop and maybe a few follow-on sessions, the integrator can build a comprehensive project plan that they will use to lead the customer to success. So these are some business outputs, and of course there are technical outputs, which our friend George here will talk about.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. I think the two key things that I really lean into the most in a discovery are the current data flow, which would be an architecture diagram of the existing product information as it's enriched, and then also the proposed data flow, which is ideally what we will come up with at the end of a phase one of an implementation. Some things that you want to make sure you document here are who owns each system in this data flow, what data type it is, how it's being transmitted, and also there's a lot of different architectural concerns you should consider when making those decisions, right? I know Akeneo prefers API integrations. I think as that continues to grow, I think that's a great way to build your data transmissions and your connectors, which leads to the data sources for these connectors, right? You have to have sample data in the exact format that you need to build the development for any implementation here. So, when at all possible, get the actual data right there. Everyone's in the same room most of the time. Obviously, that's a little different right now. But, as much as that data can be real, get it. Also, document your requirements for software development so that the connectors and custom extensions that your developers work on are what you need for the business to succeed. Lean into this, take a little bit of time. Maybe you want to put together some user stories in the discovery to make sure that everything's documented so that when you start work on this as a developer, you know what you're building. And finally, future requirements. I know Adam talked about this a little bit as well, but try to give as much information to the developers working on custom code as possible, because a lot of times there are very seemingly minor decisions that they can make over how a connector is going to be built that's going to integrate to Akeneo that actually can have a long-term effect on how easy it is to either upgrade or any changes to the data that needs to happen as your PIM evolves. And one additional quick note here is this is sort of a broad Akeneo data flow, and I like to pull something like this up with clients as we're building this, in part because there's a whole lot of places that your raw data can come from here on the left side, and a whole lot of places your data can go on the right. And so it's good to sort of go through and ask all these questions, right? Are your suppliers giving you data? Is it coming just from the ERP? Does some content team do they actually have Excel documents hiding somewhere that has unique product data that we need to make sure gets in there? These are all really good questions to ask. And Adam, I'll let you speak to the middle section of the variations within Akeneo.
Sure, thanks, George. So obviously we have all these applications that are be bringing information in and sending it out to different sales channels. But within the Akeneo solution, we also have a couple tools. Our Franklin AI tool, which helps pull in information and validate data within Akeneo. And then our onboarder tool, which is a tool that allows vendors to onboard Akeneo or PIM information directly into Akeneo through a SaaS portal. So you want to consider these two systems, in your overall solution as well. All right, George, let's talk about some discovery failures. So what can happen if we don't discover appropriately, don't do our full discovery? There's a lot that can potentially be impacted. So we've kind of separated things out here a little bit. We have our project impact, so how it can impact the project, and then our long-term impact. So how can this affect our long-term use of Akeneo and the tool? So from a project impact perspective, there's a couple obvious ones. I think everyone that's worked on a project knows these, right? The project could be over budget or delayed, a delayed launch. And we all say, time is money, so they're synonymous with each other. But if you don't understand how much work needs to be done and the nuances of various components of the solution, be they technical or functional, you may find yourself with a delayed project, or you may find yourself needing to bring in more resources last minute, which can be expensive. George, where have you seen this happen?
Yeah, I think these are, common fears of any consultant is, you never want to go over budget, and you definitely don't want to delay a launch. I think a lot of that happens from a lack of preparation up front, and that preparation really starts in the discovery. And I think, it's easy to sort of look back and say, oh, somebody wasn't as efficient as they could have been. But if you don't provide them with the proper documentation to build things correctly, if you don't have architecture diagrams drawn up from the start so that people know how the data should flow, that's really frustrating, and that can slow down any project, both as an implementer or as a developer. And I also think that can lead into some staff retention issues. Anytime a project is difficult because there's last minute changes and people expected to work overtime, that can cost you good employees who don't want to put up with that because they think their work was solid. And so it's a little bit out of the scope of a discovery per se, but those failures really start there. And I think that also can lead to some of the long-term impacts as well. If you're running late on a project and you're pushing to make a launch, you're probably going to have a higher degree of bad product information. So because people are rushed. Adam, have you seen that happen as well?
Yeah, I've definitely seen that, and even talking about that staff retention, a lot of times we'll come into projects and it's, hey, there's a go live date in 4 months or 6 months or whatever it may be, and it's a really important launch, right? And as we get closer and closer to that date, there's more and more and more pressure, and it has to get done, even if it's working late nights and weekends, and it can really be a pressure cooker. And what tends to happen is we lose the time. We don't have the time, and we kind of deprioritize the data and the product information because it's, hey, let's get the nuts and bolts, let's get everything integrated and launch, and the product information is kind of left in the back seat, and it's kind of forgotten about or de-emphasized, which can be really bad because a PIM is designed to provide you that one source of truth where you can really cleanse your data, make sure everything is good, build comprehensive descriptions, all that stuff that's going to lead to a good product experience. And when we have this go live date that's like coming in a month or two, we're going to kind of overlook that. That's not going to be prioritized. It's going to be, hey, let's get the integration done, let's get testing done. And unfortunately, to do that, to focus on the integration to meet a deadline at the cost of bad product information, we're really kind of losing a lot of the value that Akeneo can offer. It's a very powerful tool, and really cleaning up that information, that data, establishing data governance, standardizing things, adding comprehensive information, technical attributes, those things that can even help drive SEO and analytics and that good customer experience is really important. And when there's this pressure cooker, this tight timeline, or the effort to build this correct product information isn't considered during the discovery, we end up with this poor result. And in a similar vein, when we do that, we can sometimes run into a degraded ability to use some important Akeneo features. A common one we'll see is product models in Akeneo, which is essentially a way to group very similar products together and rapidly enrich them. You can also kind of think of them as configurable products on the website. So to really build proper product models, we need comprehensive product information that's really been created correctly. And so if we don't do that because we're trying to meet some really tight deadline, an e-commerce launch, then when we circle back and say, hey, let's go and work on this product information and make these product models, we're going to have to actually really rework things. And there's other features as well that we're not going to be able to use if we don't have our data model and our information properly built and properly cleansed in Akeneo. So again, we're losing out on an opportunity to improve our business. So it can really be a poor decision with some serious consequences if we don't approach discovery and conduct a thorough discovery. George, I know there's some other things here as well.
Yeah, something that I've seen along with those sort of important Akeneo features are attribute data types. I think, as an integrator, it's easier to connect to Akeneo through the API to get text attributes than it is to get, say, simple selects where you're worried about pulling the correct labels. And that's something that I've seen projects where in order to hit the deadline, you end up deprioritizing having more restrictive data types simply because you didn't adequately plan for upfront, right? And I think that's an important feature in Akeneo that really adds the ability to have cleaner data and enforces cleaner data. And going along with that, more expensive upgrade cycle. So, as a developer, anytime you write custom code for an open source or an open source backed platform like Akeneo, there's always that trade-off of looking at okay, is this feature that I want to build and extend Akeneo, is that worth the future cost of upgrade? Because anytime you upgrade major versions, say from Akeneo 3.2 to 4.0, you've got to make sure that that custom code makes it through and works in the new version. So, there's a cost benefit that needs to be done there to make sure that what you're doing is actually the best for the business, both currently and for the future. And finally, I think it's important to talk a little bit about poor performance, right? I think Akeneo is a great product, but I've also seen times where it doesn't perform quite as well because there were some flawed assumptions early on about either putting too many rules in there, or maybe the way the integrations were designed and constructed slow down the product enrichment cycle. Adam, have you seen that as well?
Yeah, George, I definitely have. That rules example. During a good discovery phase, we understand the capabilities and the intentions of our rules engine in Akeneo, which can be very powerful for automating enrichment processes. But we've sometimes seen during a rush of a project, maybe without an adequate discovery, people will see the rules engine and treat it like something that can manage full-on ETL processes. And there's hundreds of rules written that impact hundreds of thousands of products in the system, and that can create some suboptimal performance. So we are always able to work through it, but we need to understand when we don't do an appropriate discovery, there's a bunch of unknowns. As we enter the project, that can kind of rear their ugly heads a couple weeks before go live, where it's a mad scramble to fix everything, and sometimes some less than ideal decisions are made. Great, so that concludes our presentation. I think we want to move to some questions now. Let's see if we have any questions. So I do have a good question. So the question is, what is the number of ideal attendees at a discovery session? So I don't think there's a exact answer here. I'd say it depends on the customer. I think typically we'll see somewhere between maybe 5 to 15 as like a ballpark. it really depends. You want representatives from all those 4 different areas we talked about. If you have a massive team, it's a massive company. So say there's 80 people that work on product content creation. We don't want all 80 to show up. A couple people, a couple strong representatives should be in the sessions. So I would say probably ideally somewhere in the 5 to 15 range. George?
Yeah, I think I really hate to give this answer, but it depends, right? 5 to 15 feels about right. But I also think that one of the other benefits that we didn't even highlight of a good discovery is the ability to get buy-in from all of the different employees of these teams, right? Because when you show up at a discovery, a lot of times, people know that you're going to be changing their day-to-day operations. And most of the time, people get pretty excited about it because, frankly, there's a lot of really bad PIMs out there and legacy databases that are a pain to enrich. But you still need to make sure that people, feel like they're part of the process. And so, maybe a tactic if you do have a larger group of people that you're worried about fitting in the same space is sort of splitting out and having different sessions where, maybe you just bring your developers and your IT personnel in for, half an hour one day, or I mean, that's too short, but, a couple hours or something. And you can sort of mix it up so that you can balance that enough people feel like they're involved while you still have a small enough group that you can really get stuff done.
Yeah, I think it's a great point, George. And you're kind of touching a little bit on change management, right? We're bringing this new product that's going to really impact the team cross-functionally. So even during the initial discovery phase, we want to start thinking about change management. And I think socializing, what's coming and bringing in these important stakeholders early is really important. So great question. It looks like we're actually just about out of time. So thank you everyone for joining us on today's webinar. There will be an email that will be sent out with a recording or a link to the recording of today's session. So thank you very much for joining us.